Welcome to Retro Talk today. And today I could not be more excited to be joined by Dan Klitsner, creator of Bop It, all around toy guru, modern day Willy Wonka of kids' toys. Dan, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm great, Lennon. Thank you. It is my pleasure.
So we're gonna start off with a little bit of introduction, getting to know you with some 90s icebreakers to start things off. So what was your 90s kind of comfort movie?
90s comfort movie. I think it probably would be Pet Detective 2.
Solid
Was that
choice.
90s?
Yeah,
It
I,
feels like 90s, unless it
yeah.
was a
It
little later.
if
Yeah.
it has the vibes, I'm gonna throw it in there with 90s. And if you know that big binder of CDs, that we had, what album are you grabbing first with when you're flipping through that big thing of CDs?
Probably Nirvana,
Okay,
maybe maybe still I think probably some of my 80s, favorites, things like Talking Heads or um, I listened to a lot of punk in the 80s, so I think I probably let those continue, but yeah, I'd say that more of the grunge side of things. And but I really like all kinds of music if it's good. I switched genres a lot, and I'd say that I tried to follow a lot of things. It's hard for me to place 90s compared to 80s and 2010s.
no, that's
Sometimes they
okay.
blur together because
Yeah,
then I later like Queens of the Stone Age and
yeah.
bands that were
Guess
more, just after that. But I really kind of I like rock with a little more taste to it, not heavy metal. Probably the only
okay.
thing I don't actually
Yeah,
didn't really follow.
yeah. Awesome. And let's say it's 1998 and you're getting in the car. What's taking you to work that day? What are you driving?
What was I driving? Boy, I think uh, in that era, did I have an Mazda RX-7? Might have had RX-7. I think
It's
I
fitting the
had still
vibes with the
had that.
music. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when were Black Eyed Peas?
Early, early 2000s.
Early 2000s. Yeah, that was,
Hmm.
it seems like right on that cusp as I
Yeah. Okay.
was, but I think, no, it was more, yeah, 90s would have been the RX-7.
Okay. So short drive to work for you in the
It
morning.
was the,
Yeah.
it was the first new car that I think I had. I always bought used cars and I
Okay.
splurged and got a new car.
Yeah. Good for you.
Mhm.
All right. So absolutely love your backdrop today. So I want to take things, all the way back. So I know you're a notable inventor outside of Bop It. So what were kind of things that maybe inspired you kind of as a kid? What were you playing with?
Well, I just drew a lot of monsters as a kid. If you look through, I don't have any of them here. I have some drawings over there that, I loved drawing from a young age and making stuff. So I would either be drawing or doing sculpture or clay or building stuff, building a tree fort, things like that. I just really like doing stuff with my hands. And yeah, I did a lot of art. My parents let me sort of follow that pretty freely and let me go to some classes and things like that. Um, but that would be sort of my time and I loved sports after school as a kid. I lived on a cul-de-sac in Walnut Creek and in California, and I was lucky that there was probably maybe 15 houses on that cul-de-sac, and each one had kids in it, and of all nationalities. Somehow I was on this thing where there was just like one of each of of everything.
Right.
So I grew up with this great idyllic, diverse group of kids, lots of them my age, a little younger, a little older, and we would just play. We'd come home from school, and I thought that's the way everyone had it. And then as I became an adult and I had kids, I was like, wait a minute, why can't I find that? But I do
Sure.
think that concept of just playing together is something that maybe that influenced me. I've always had that idea that that was the best way to connect.
Yeah, and it kind of does translate because a lot of what there's a community aspect to the kind of things that you've kind of worked on. So I do want to talk about some of the other because you've had a relationship with Hasbro kind of dating back for a bit and worked on different products. What were those kind of like early days pre Bop It, kind of like?
Well, my first, you know, sort of pre even Hasbro was, when I finally went to school for what I wanted to do. First, I sort of went into engineering at UC Davis, and I really hated it. I knew I wanted to do something. I didn't want to do architecture. I didn't want to do graphic design, but I really knew I wanted to make things, but I didn't sort of know what industrial design was. And so I went, luckily my dad was working, he was a part-time actor, and he was working on a film, and a director. He was talking about his son who was unhappy. And he told him about this school called Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, where they had this thing called industrial design. And so he thought it sounded, without telling me, he sent away for the catalog. And I was always telling him, I don't want to be an artist. I need to be practical. I need to get it. I can't make money as an artist, because I thought that was what he wanted me to do, was encouraging me. And he says, no, this is different. So I opened this catalog up and saw all these things like blenders and, special cars, and uh, just different. I'm trying to think of all the different, it seems like mostly household equipment, or things that were really slick and sort of Italian designed. And I said, that's it. That's what I want to do. And so as I went into industrial design, when I graduated, I started to freelance and do a lot of design. I designed a lot of bottles. Actually, people know the Woodford Reserve bourbon bottle and the Clorox toilet cleaner bottle. That's
Oh.
this award that I got for the under the toilet bottle and I was really a freelance designer working for some bigger corporate design companies. So Clorox wasn't my client, but I got to work on all these things and ended up
Sure.
designing a lot of stuff that's still here today. And one of my clients was a toy company, um, Discovery Toys, and I designed a lot of preschool toys and educational toys for them. It was a great find. They were local, and I just found them in the paper and the want ads looking for freelance designer, and I designed like most of their stuff. And if even some of those are still around today, like this thing called Marble Works and Garopolis. They were great. They were like, I loved it as a designer. But I didn't, I then heard that inventing was something you could do in the toy industry specifically. So I started to look into what other, um, who did that, who licensed ideas. And I just sort of this whole discovery of what that was like as a designer. Could you sell your own ideas? It sounded great to me. So it took a long time, but, through kind of looking and trying to meet people and eventually building up relationships with those companies. But it all sort of started on this path of not really knowing kind of what I wanted, but being a little general, and then slowly kind of zeroing in. And it appealed to me because I love the idea of coming up with ideas and selling them to companies.
Yeah, love that. So continuing on that path, what was kind of your first aha or win, kind of entering that new realm?
Well, interesting that the first win, I brought a little prop here, was, remember, so I had a client. One was an electronics company, Memorex. I was designing remote controls for them. And I started to meet toy companies, and I had this little idea for this shovel that was like called the Sand Claw. And it
I
was
think we
this
all had
very,
that. Yeah.
very ergonomic thing, right? And I knew about, kind of some manufacturer. I knew, hey, I could do this blow molded one piece shovel that fit your hand, like, like a dog digs like this. And I went and I had tested this on beaches, and I kind of made prototypes, and then I tried to go sell it, and I was told, oh, it's cool, but it's not promotional enough. It's just sort of like utilitarian, and none of the big toy companies wanted it. But I found a small company that liked it, and they licensed it from me. So it was my first deal. They didn't quite understand who was going to patent it or how that worked, and so I actually got royalties on it for a couple of years, and then it started getting knocked off everywhere. And they kind of called and said, "I'm really sorry, but we can't keep paying you
It's
because
painful.
everyone's doing this."
Yeah.
So, it, it was, although I'm proud to say that this is 32 years later, this is still out there. And I see it everywhere, and I see it's knocked off. But on the other hand, I kind of call it shareware. And I feel like if I had to give up something, give up one of my ideas to the inventing gods, this was a good one to kind of show me that it was possible to come up with ideas, sell them, and have them take off. Like, in a way, that was worth a lot, maybe more than the money, was to then tell me that I could do this.
Right.
And I think that's, so I like to, at least that's my positive spin on it, which is not to be bitter. Of course, if I never sold anything else and that was my big break, I probably would be saying something different.
Right.
But I don't think I would have gotten where I was if I hadn't had, you have to make mistakes along the way. And I'm just very proud that it's still out there being used this long. It's lasted longer than almost anything that I've ever created. So that's pretty cool. So that was my first attempt at licensing something. And that encouraged me. And then but I just kept meeting a lot of toy companies and doing mostly games. And, but the first game I licensed to Hasbro was called Go-Go Worms. And it was this, if you look it up on Retro Junk, there's like a website or YouTube, and it's got
It's a
this
Play-Doh,
great
right?
Play-Doh.
Or
Yeah.
yeah.
They're worms that you extrude out of Play-Doh, and you're like doing a slow motion race. You'd roll the dice and you get to put them in. And it was just like a really messy, fun game, turning the extrusions into like a race. And
Okay.
so that was a big deal to license it to Hasbro. At the time, it was Milton Bradley. And I remember playing games a lot as a kid with all those kids from the cul-de-sac and my brother and sister, and always just loving seeing this Milton Bradley logo on a box and going, it's Mousetrap and Risk and all these classic games that we all know. And I thought, oh my God, I just sold a game to that company. That's like my childhood,
Right.
warm and fuzzy feeling of how cool it would be. I really couldn't believe it. I just like something about that it was that company that meant so much to me growing up. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love that. Now, how I love how you talked about those failures, and it seemed like you kind of really did translate those into Bop It. But obviously, Bop It was a series of successes and failures in and of itself. I want to speak through what was kind of the nexus of that, and how did we end up with the Bop It that we know today.
Well, it's a fun story. I always try to tell it and add something I haven't added before. So I brought a couple. Oops, where's my thing? I brought a couple props again. So here, let me see if this helps. So one of my clients, as I said, was Memorex, and I was designing things like this remote, slick industrial design stuff like this. So this is actually a prototype or a mock-up, that it's not the real product, but I had several remotes for them. And while I was doing remotes, this is when universal remotes were a thing, where you didn't have to just use the remote you got with your TV. You could get a remote that worked on all TVs. It was a big deal. So they said, we want you to do universal remotes. At the same time, I had these toy clients that were building, that were looking for ideas. And I thought, well, why wouldn't we do a remote for kids that would be a little more fun? And so I came up with ideas like this idea called Remotes Out of Control. And this is one of the few that got made, and it's a couch potato. So it's like a joke, oh, it's a fun thing that you'd sit on your coffee table. My favorite was this pizza called Remote by the Slice,
Oh,
where
that's great.
see the pep, like just being creative
Yeah.
with what that the parts of the pizza look like the buttons for your remote. And I just
Yeah.
imagine, why wouldn't kids are watching things like Nickelodeon and all that stuff. It would be fun to have, the remote controls be as wacky as some of the shows they liked. And so this company liked it. And I said, yeah, but there's this one thing I've been working, and that idea of remote controls and universal remotes. I said, but what about, there's this thing I'd heard that you want to watch the kid, not the toy. Meaning, what's the toy making the kid do as a secret to, and here you have remotes where you're just pushing them with your thumbs. And I thought, well, how could I make a more physical remote? So there was this idea called the channel bopper, where rather than remote being a thing where you push buttons with your thumbs, you bopped it on the table to change channels, channel up, channel down. And then how can you be more physical with the volume instead of a button that you push? Oh, you could twist it like an old, so this was a knob to twist. And then all you really need is an on off, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm changing channels, I'm turning on volume. We didn't have a lot of channels back then. So on off was a pull, right? That's the most physical thing. Like, so, and I wanted to add sounds to it. So this thing would be a wacky remote with sounds that I could just imagine kids banging on the table.
Yeah.
I don't like that channel. Bam, bam, bam,
You
bam.
you also can't lose it in the couch. It's much bigger.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
bigger and silly. And I thought maybe you could kind of play with it when it wasn't being used as a remote. I just thought that was this idea of using things more than for their one single use. So it failed. They didn't want to do it. They just wanted to do the pizza and the couch potato and the football. I had a football like called I don't know, some sort of clever name, I'm sure. But anyway, they're out there. Those things got made, but they didn't want to do this. So this was sitting around, and I had done a bunch of LCD games for Tiger Electronics. If you look, there was like a couple of games. I had also done this thing called Light 3, which is a light up game, like a lot of handheld electronics. And the LCD game business started to really drop for them. So I actually got a call from one of their inventor relations people that had worked with me. Oops, let's see. My battery's we're doing all right. It said, and she said, what do you have? We need new ideas for LCD handheld games, electronic games. So I started looking, right, and this mock-up was still sitting around on my desk. And I thought, well, what if that remote control wasn't a remote control? What if it was a game? And I had a couple people, like I kept pitching this as a thing to other toy companies, like, it's a toy, but it's remote control. And I mean, one guy, he said, well, maybe it's not a remote. And I was like, oh, he's crazy. Of course it's a remote. What's the whole point of it? Why wouldn't it be a remote? Then it's sort of those thoughts, you sort of listen a little bit out of one ear, even though you're pretty sure of your idea. And I thought, when she said that, I thought, well, maybe that thing could be a handheld electronic game. But I assumed it would have a screen. So there's a bunch of sketches and things I have of a hammer with a screen in it. And you could imagine the type of games that might have, but it just didn't feel right. You couldn't really see the screen while you were banging away. And so just however these things, it just kind of intrigued me. And the next step was, well, maybe it's got lights in it. And it's like Simon, a memory game, where it would go light, 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 and you'd have to bop and twist and pull and remember. And I thought, well, that's cool. It's different than what Simon is. Simon is just push buttons. And this is a more physical, active thing, which is what I want to do, make kids more animated. But it actually was kind of hard to, it's like rubbing your tummy and patting your head or whatever. You can't really, it's harder to remember a pattern like that rather than a visual pattern that you can see in a circle the way Simon was. It sort of showed me, I was like, wow, that's really hard to get past 3 moves or 4 moves. It just started to get confusing. But then I was like, well, maybe it is just 3 moves at a time. I tried that. It's like, yeah, and then somehow the epiphany was take the screen out, take the lights out. They were expensive. What if it just told you what to do? And still, I thought it would have to do at least 2 or 3 moves in a row. But I don't know what possessed me to say, what if it was just 1 move? What if it just said to do 1 thing at a time? Oh, that would never work, right? Why would you ever miss? Right? Why would you ever, if someone told you, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it wrong at some point, you go, I'll never, ever get that wrong. Right. And so
Yeah.
I don't know quite. I said, well, I'll try it. So I made a video voice sort of thing on my computer simulating bop it, twist it, bop it. And I tried it with this foam core model, and I was like, it does feel confusing as it gets faster. The trick was getting faster. I sometimes get, I can't either get there in time, but it wasn't just about not being able to do it. It was that your brain switched things because I think your muscle memory, I could tell, felt like, and this is something I've been thinking about more lately. It's the idea that we as humans are really good at pattern recognition. That's why you can play Simon or something, right? Visually, especially, we're really good visual. We can see patterns that are very precise. Audio, processing an audio instruction into a physical action is actually a whole different sequence in your brain and a lot harder. It's much, much slower than your visual processing. But what you find is that when you have a rhythm, people, like you've probably heard listening to a song or something, if they change rhythm in the middle, you really notice, right? You can go on forever on the same beat, but the minute, oh, why they skipped the beat there on purpose in that song, or they ended it early, it's cool. But that's sort of what started to happen as I played around with this. It was like, wow, if you think bop it, twist it, bop it, twist it, what's going to come next? Your mind thinks bop it comes next, but it's random. So it's like bop it, twist it, bop it, bop it. And it's like your body wants to do the move it thinks is happening, but you don't. So that really said, whoa, that's cool. That's something because it's a rhythm. So I think to me, that was the part that I really thought was different. And the thing that I don't think people realize is the biggest invention of Bop It is believing that only one move at a time would be hard. Because there were three different physical actions, and your muscle memory would get confused and your pattern recognition would get confused. So that's the most analytical versus intuitive I could be about it, that I think was just thinking, what if? And I just think it's a lesson in people thinking they know the result before they test it, that you have to experience it to really know.
Yeah, because there really is this kind of neurological play at work that I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about, because you almost get like an oxytocin dopamine hit if you go further than you did the last time, and it becomes addictive, so it's just another layer to it that just makes it just so great, I think.
Yeah, it's the musical part, like when you learn something, when people learn multiplication tables, 2 times 2 equals 4, 3 times, like there's a lot where people will learn to a beat and it actually sticks better. But the reverse happens where it's because you sort of want the comfort of it's the same. And I like getting faster and faster, but your body doesn't really want to be thrown a loop there. But it's fun when you can catch the twist and succeed. But I do think it's kind of telling when you'll hear a couple or someone say, "I told you, why didn't you do that? I
Yeah,
told you, take the garbage out." It's like, I just forgot, whatever it is. It's like, audio instructions are definitely
right.
not automatic just because you tell, so I think Bop It sort of proves that like, yeah, you can tell someone what to do, but they really have to be focused to truly get everything right. So it's just very different than written or, other instructions.
Yeah, so last year, actually, Bop It made it as a finalist for the Toy Hall of Fame among a list that included
Yeah.
Ken, Bingo, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a real Mount Rushmore of toys. Take us through like your reaction to that. And to me, I think it's only a matter of time for Bop It.
Yeah, I hope so. I thought it would, I guess it depends on who votes on these things, awards and inductions often. You don't know who's actually voting. And one thing about Bop It is the demographic, is pretty strong as a millennial and, older Gen Zs. That's the ones that are just super passionate because it really hit a nerve in the late 90s, early 2000s. So if you were born in the 90s, you really played it. It bonded. The music's inside of you, the friends, the commercials. Like it was bigger than I even realized at the time what an impact it's had. So if you're a little outside of that age range, it tapers off. So if the people voting are 45, they're like, yeah, I've heard of that, but we're gonna Ken, like it's probably just a little young
Good
for
point.
some the people. So I
Right.
don't think it was a matter of it not being popular with that group. I think it's that it just didn't have enough. Who was on the committee? Who and there was public voting also. So I didn't actually do any. I was going through a lot of other stuff, and I didn't do any, not one drop of PR saying vote Bop It in or something. So maybe I could have with my social media helped it,
Yeah.
but we'll see. I don't know how they do it, but um, I do know that the Strong Museum, which does it, they've been to my office in San Francisco and played like the giant Bop It table. They actually want that for the museum.
Really?
I have this big
Yeah, I've seen
industrial
that.
one.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll make a deal with them. It's when you induct Bop It, you can have
There you go. Yeah.
that.
Well, we certainly got you for the votes for next time. Um, but it's funny you mentioned just games in general of the period because a lot of games in the late 90s were actually really frustrating, to be honest. It was like a lot of nexus of maybe some anxiety problems. I'm only joking, but
Like
was
what?
there
Like
like
what?
a Perfection, I think, was another one. Hungry Hungry Hippo, like a lot of these like beat the clock type games. I almost think there was a conclave of game inventors, in the Vegas 95 or something. But
Mm-hmm.
um, also, Bop It in pop culture has made a lot of TV appearances, including Robot Chicken, Zoe 101, The Simpsons. Uh, which one were you kind of most floored by?
Well, Saturday Night Live came first, and growing up with Saturday Night Live, it was I started getting phone calls all over the place. I didn't know about it. Nobody knew about it. All of a sudden, it was like, "Ooh, did you just see what they did?" And I was just, it was, it wasn't like nobody had made irreverent jokes about Boppett's form factor before, or
Right.
it's continued. Literally, I get weekly. People will say, they'll post a funny video of using Bop It in an adult manner, let's just say. And what's really funny is they almost always think they're the first one to think about it. And
Right.
I try to say that's wonderful, but you're actually part of a genre. You're not, it's not, which is fine, like make a really good one. If you're going to do that, just try to do your research and see who's done what already. Because
Yeah.
it's amazing how many people have done that video. But Saturday Night Live, before all the social media, did it first with Amy Poehler and Fred Armisen, where he comes in and he tells this thing about as if he has a new toy, and of course it keeps saying pull it, pull it, pull it, pull it,
Right.
and that's the joke, and that's been repeated multiple times throughout now social media. So, but it was probably the biggest cool feeling, like, oh my god, this thing I invented just made it to Saturday Night Live, and it's
Yeah.
being
That's
spoofed
good.
and made fun of, and it's irreverent. I couldn't have asked for more, right?
Right.
Then The Simpsons, I think I've told this story, but I used to go to the TED conferences before they were before there were TED Talks. It was like a cool thing to do. And it was a little more chill. And Matt Groening was there speaking, or yeah, he was just sort of a guy who would go to them. And I met him and I said, "Oh my God, I love The Simpsons." He goes, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I invent games and toys. Anything I would know about?" I said, "Well, this thing called Bop It." He goes, "I hate that game." And he's like, "Well, love, hate." He kind of said, in the car, long car rides, it's just my kids. And we actually exchanged signed Boppets. I signed one. He has one. I don't have it here with me.
That's cool.
But he signed one for me. I signed one for him. And then he goes, "Stay tuned." And then the next season, they came out with that amazing,
That's
like,
so
it's
funny.
like a 3-minute intro about
Yeah.
Boppa, the entire Simpsons, and it's so funny. It nails it. I mean, they're just brilliant. And
Yeah. And Homer chucks it
so
out of the car.
checks out the car, and then a guy driving the other direction, is fed up with his kids, and he chucks it out of his car, but it goes through the Simpsons window and lands back in Bart's lap, and then they keep playing. Like they just they just really milk it. And I'd say that, in terms of the one I'm most proud of, that I'm just like, to me, that's the best, because I love The Simpsons so much. But the first one was Saturday Night Live, where I just said, wow, this has really hit pop culture in a way that
Right.
I couldn't believe it. And it seems to be growing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And does anybody try and challenge you to, and you're going to have to let me know, is it a bop off or a bop it off? Because I thought about it for this, but I put the batteries in backwards and it just tells me to stop it. But does anybody challenge you?
Well, I'm pretty good at it. I wouldn't say like I try to do this analogy. Do you think the inventor of the piano was the best piano player? Probably not even close, right? So
Right.
it isn't just because I had more experience with it doesn't mean my physical skills are the best. They definitely aren't. Like there are people like when I first came out with it, my kids were younger. They were on like a baseball team, softball team or actually baseball at that time. And there was one kid on the team who was like clearly the best athlete. You could just see his reactions were so fast. And I remember when I took it there and had them play it, and he never made a mistake, and he was like the words could barely be out of the bop it, and he would do the move. Like his reactions were so fast, and I remember thinking, wow, there are just people who are just faster than others with their audible
Right.
processing. Like I literally couldn't even tell how he was hearing it as fast enough to react as fast as he was doing it. So I can say that I don't have those reaction skills. So I know that at a high speed there are people that are much better, and then there are
Sure.
people that, of course, can only get to three, because their audible skills, something's going on. Their processing is slower. So hopefully, when you design a game, you're not designing it just to be someone who you got to design it universally so it's still fun whether you beat it succeed, but that's, and I think that is the secret of Bop It, is it's silly and fun and makes you laugh. The humor is a huge part of Bop It. um, Gamers think of it as like a game mechanic, and as if you are supposed to just nail it, but the secret of Bop It is the humor, that it's silly to watch someone do it. The scream, the original Bop It, having it scream when you failed, was actually a Homer Simpson. Originally, I used dope. I used the Homer Simpson dope because it was popular at the time. That's why I didn't tie in why it was so cool when I met Matt Groening. I said, the first mock-up used Homer's thing, because when you think of when Homer does that, he's making fun of sort of himself, like, oh, but my bad, right? It isn't like you failed, that's not what Bop It's about. It's like, oh, darn it, but it's silly, then it berates you, but it's kind of got this vibe, a little, it's Bop It Extreme got a little meaner, but it's still, hopefully you're taking, it's giving you crap because it's like you're hanging around with your friends playing this game and giving each other a hard time because you like each other. So I think that's the secret to it, is when you fail, it's funny. And that was really important.
Yeah, it's such a smart approach for that.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to licensing for Bop It and for Hasbro in 2008, right? You obviously had that longer relationship that we talked about, but was there anything that you maybe think that really still is a miss that maybe didn't come to fruition?
You mean other products?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, actually, I think you mean 19. Bop It was licensed in 1996. It came out in 97. The relaunch was 2008,
Yeah.
which is
Relaunch.
what's, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
2008.
Thank you. Yeah.
And a lot of, what's cool to be working all these different versions and all the different variations. Boy, any inventor who's doing this a long time will have, a giant list of the things that they thought were going to be big and they didn't. And some of them eventually come out. So interestingly enough, one is, do you know Hyperdash? It's this game where it calls out, let's see, here it is. It's a game that was invented. I did it about 6 months before Bop It. It was the same idea of animating kids, getting them to run around and move. And it was this game where you had these different colored cups with numbers, and it would call out green, and you spread these out around your house, and when you do this, it had these little buttons inside that would read the ridges on these to know which cup was which and verify that you did the right one. But I love this idea that you could make it as big as your table, you could make it, put one upstairs, you could, just
Yeah.
crazy run around. And I thought this was the best thing ever. And you would think so that once Bop It was sold, that every company would be like, give us your next Bop It. We want to Bop It, including Hasbro. I pitched this for 10 years, 10 years, and nobody got it. And I would have kids come to the studio and they would love it. And my partners and I
Yeah.
were just like, what is wrong with these toy companies? And nobody wanted to do it. So, you know, it shows you things, there's probably other things like it, but I'm saying it could have just, that could have just been the end of the story. But what happened was I was meeting with the head of Wild Planet, Danny Grossman. Their office was near mine, and he kept saying, "Why don't we do products with you? Let's meet for lunch once a year." So we'd have Chinese food once a year and talk about his line. And he was doing this stuff called Spy Gear. Do you remember Spy Gear? It was like
Yes, I had a lot of
yeah,
those.
yeah. So
Yeah.
they got into Spy Gear, and they were doing sort of these sciencey related
Hmm.
things and stuff. And they would always say no games. Like most
Uh,
companies send out a wish list, and his wish list was no games, because there's a different buyer in the store, so that they have to work on their own. And so we'd have lunch. He goes, we've tried to come up with this Spy Gear stuff. It's just not me. I do games, and you just say no games. So I have tons of games I'm working on, but they're not for you. Goes, well, if we did do a game, what would it be? Well, there is this one game that's been rejected about 1,000 times, and I don't know why. Maybe it's right for you. I think it actually kind of fits you because it's a little different. It's like good for kids. It's not just some weird,
yeah.
action figure or Spy Gear. And I showed it to him, and he's like, "Huh, hey, that's kind of cool. I like that. I like the message there." So they went and they tested it. God, it's testing really well, and then we ended up doing it. And they were literally 2 blocks from my office for 10 years, never sold them an idea. And so they it turned out this huge hit. And part of it was because, you know, um, mostly moms and dads, but mostly moms who were becoming bloggers. We called them mommy bloggers. At the early stages of internet were posting about, and they started to post that here's this game that'll get your kids running around.
Get them to
That's
sleep.
what
Yeah. Gotta
right?
get them to sleep.
So it's got popular, and it coincided right when Amazon had just started to sort
Oh,
of
wow.
sell toys. And so what happened was, because this was the first time you would have online, reviews from consumers, if you think, mommy bloggers, and they could put a link in, like, here's a great product that I love for my kids, and here's the link right to Amazon where you could click and buy it. That's the first time that actually happened,
Yeah.
right? In history. You normally, we forget. You see an ad, you go to the store, you just see a commercial, there's like a lot of steps. This was instant, and it just took off because of those two factors, and people don't realize Hyperdash was the #1 game for like 2 years from Amazon, and or longer, and it kept extending the lines. It was there's probably a generation. See, so this was, I believe it was 2010, 8 or 9, or maybe a little early. Like, so it was 10 years after Bop It, and people who were, millennials didn't have it. So it's an
Yeah.
in-between thing, so that the Gen Z, like, you'll find another group that goes, Hyperdash, I remember that,
Yeah.
so
So
it's
kids
really
are kids are
specific.
in college, just like this guy put me to sleep. I'm running around the
Yeah.
house. Yeah.
So that's sort of one that could have just been in the closet if I hadn't had that lunch
Yeah.
and
That's amazing.
and now what's interesting is it's come and gone, and now we've actually just relaunched it this month at the London Toy Fair with a really cool company called Golden Bear that I was in a meeting with them, and they're like, we're looking for things. They're doing this really cool soccer bot thing, like these out there looking for outdoor active games. He's like, something like Hyperdash. Remember the old Hyperdash? I go, yeah, I remember Hyperdash. I
Too funny.
created it.
Yeah.
And so he's like, and I go, do you know that we have the rights back? It's available. And he's like, no way. So we're doing it together and relaunching it with in much cooler design, a couple other features. Like, I'm pretty excited because that's all it takes is, again, these chance meetings. Like
Yeah.
I like
Right.
to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
relationships are the most important part of inventing, or probably any business. It's knowing the people, spending the time. Like, look, it took 10 years to kind of lunches to kind of finally go, hey, I know one that'll work. And you just really have to be patient and make sure you have the right company at the right time, the right product, the right, you know, anyway, those are just two stories of how that has
Yeah,
worked. And you can imagine how many things are in the closet that you never know.
sure,
I love this thing. It's just still there. Why didn't the one, now you have, well, I won't keep going on that topic, but there are the most painful thing for inventors are the ones that you were absolutely right about 8 years too soon,
sure.
and you forgot about it, and then you had to watch someone else come out with it 8 years later, go, that was, why didn't I keep showing that? Which to me was Tamagotchi. I have these heartbreaking renderings and prototypes and stop motion videos I did of how to do I called it LCD pets, and they were little pets that you, like little
Oh,
birds
no
in
way.
cages.
Yeah,
It is completely Tamagotchi, and nobody got it. They didn't know how to do it.
painful, painful.
And it just, when it came out, I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I keep showing that? Because it
Yeah,
was Tiger. Tiger came out with their version, and I had a great relationship. I had forgotten that I'd even done it.
yeah,
And so you find the hardest thing about inventing is keeping track of what you have, knowing when and who to show it to,
sure.
and the timing. That's just the part people don't realize is why it's so hard.
Right. Yeah. Tamagotchi thing's interesting. You were really out in the 90s and in that
Yeah,
capacity. Man.
yeah.
Well, I did want to give some time for you because I do want to talk about if you can talk to us about Bop It for Good, as well as if anything else might be coming down the pipeline.
Well, there's a lot coming down the pipeline. I've actually had several new games out the last couple of years. Pandemic, I was pretty productive with my partners, and the start with that first, maybe pipeline, then finish with Bop for Good. But people might, at this point, everyone's. What does this? Make sure our battery. But at this point, everyone's probably seen Pop It, which is this game where you have to try to put out these and then pop them back, right?
Oh,
Have you
nice. Yep.
seen this?
Yep.
It's like, it's so, this was kind of got the idea for this a couple of years ago when during the pandemic, lots and lots of people had these non-electronic versions of this. And I
Right.
had one in my office, and I saw it, and I had heard on my social media, someone said, what do you think of the Pop It craze? I'm like, what's the Pop It craze? Probably because I did Bop It. So they were just sort of asking. And I had one of these sitting in my office from a long time ago. They've been around a long time. They just took off, as a trend. And I sort of said to my partners, we should do an electronic version of this. I don't know how, but we would. And so this is like the number one selling game the last couple of years, and it's been knocked off so much. It was so in China, they supposedly sold 2 million of them, and we don't
Good
get a penny
gracious.
because it's a full knockoff, and you can't do anything
Ugh.
about it. So that's it. But we're doing like figured out how to make electronic kind of versions for babies
Oh, I love
where
that. Yeah.
where they can push it from both sides. So see, it knows what color you're pushing. So it's got it.
Nice.
But I love stuff like this, super tactile mixed with electronic. So these are new things that I've done with my partners the last couple of years. I'm looking at a whole bunch of other stuff here, but I won't. Those are the favorites that I have. And and there is this thing I'm going to do a Kickstarter on coming in May called Sling It. Sling It, I will simply describe as if you think of a long beanbag like a sausage, but you throw it like an axe, what would the target be? Basically, it's these bars, like these long slats that you throw, and it's incredibly satisfying. It's like a cornhole, vertical cornhole, and
Yeah.
you're throwing these sausages into this, and I'm just going to say it's actually based on an old uh, kind of a medieval practice they used to have, it turns out, where if I can float this idea, but that it was apparently something that they did in medieval Majorca to test the thickness of sausages if they would stick between the bars of the castle gate. I can totally verify this is true, and on April 1st, you'll sort of see the full story, if that gives you a clue
I
as to
can't
how this
wait.
works.
Perfect date.
So slinging sausages at the castle gate has turned into Sling It, and we're going big with a big like crowd-funded thing. Something because it's made of wood. It's something we could do sort of on our own with a partner that did Perplexus with us, if you remember Perplexus. And so I'm very excited about it because it's like I've never done a Kickstarter, so that's going to be really fun, and it's a great addictive game. And the story is pretty good. And then Bop It for Good, yeah, it's what we started. My wife Alicia and I started to basically for Bop It's 25th anniversary, figure out ways where Bop It, what can we do with Bop It to do the most good? And there are a lot of things because it actually has helped people that are blind for years because you can play it as an audio game with no vision because it's tactile. You know, it just turns out. And so doing a ton of stuff with Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco.
That's awesome.
I created the Bop It button, which is one that I did independently. And that is a, how much good can you do with one button? That's what I said. It's a one button Bop It, and it's far more fun than I ever thought. And most people who play it are like amazed because it's like Bop It, don't Bop It, do Bop It, do not Bop It. Very crazy, like it plays with your brain more than your dexterity. So that has we've done tons of promotions with that to help Lighthouse for the Blind, and also people that are autistic are also very helped by Bop It. So Bop It for Good is a website we put together. But I mean, yeah, you know, if you check it out, it's anything you buy there helps those groups.
Yeah, because I'm gonna buy that hat. That's gonna be my first
Oh yeah,
purchase.
this is
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
love that. Well, Dan, thanks so much for your time today. Your creativity and passion was brought so many laughs and memories, along with a lot, some pain and suffering for some families, including mine. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Len, and I really appreciate. Hopefully, I've given a few different spins on some of the perspective. Every time I talk to someone and you ask great questions, it sort of helps me revisit and usually come up with a few more insights that I hadn't even thought of before. So I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks again.